I know what you're thinking. That's not Yugi, those aren't his friends, and that's definitely not Blue Eyes White Dragon. So how can this be considered a remake? And yeah, it's true. Yu-Gi-Oh! Zexal doesn't have any of the same characters as the original. It's not set in the same location or time period as the original. In fact, not only is Blue Eyes missing, none of the cards are the same. But hear me out, Yu-Gi-Oh! Zexal is indeed a remake. I know remakes are often characterized as being an updated version of something that already exists, but hold up, because remakes come in more flavors than just that. Let me break it down for you. The first type is basically a replacement. Take for instance the Hunter x Hunter anime from 2011. If you've caught that, then there's not much reason to go back to the 1999 version. Maybe you prefer the 1990s aesthetic, but at the end of the day, the newer one pretty much takes over. But there's another flavor, and trust me, it's the tastier one. The reimagining. Picture this, same basic ingredients, but the characters get a fresh look. The plot? Similar, but maybe served in a different dish, like a new time period or a different place. Sprinkle in a few twists and turns that weren't there in the original recipe, and bam, you've got yourself a second serving coexisting happily with the original. And where does Zexal fit into this tasty spectrum? You guessed it, it's a reimagining through and through. But here's the kicker. Yu-Gi-Oh! Zexal, in many ways, stays truer to the roots of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Manga than its Duel Monsters predecessor ever did. They did such a good job that nobody even noticed. I know appearances can be deceiving, but nearly every aspect of Yu-Gi-Oh! Zexal can be traced back to the original story. The main character summons a spirit with his golden necklace to aid him in duels. His rival sports a blue-eyed dragon. And the first major story arc is a tournament featuring top duelists from around the globe, and it's hosted by a rich eccentric. But Yu-Gi-Oh! Zexal goes the extra mile by incorporating manga elements that were skipped over by the 2000s anime. Most of the important stuff eventually made its way into Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters, like how Yugi and the Pharaoh met, and how Kaiba became a billionaire CEO before graduating from high school. But it was either briefly glossed over or told in the wrong order. There are still a ton of people who consider Kaiba's backstory from the anime to be filler, but his backstory was derived from an early arc of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Manga, even though it is a bit different. And it's not part of just any filler arc, it's the one that interrupts Battle City, arguably Yu-Gi-Oh's best arc. So not only are people going to doubt its authenticity, tons of people are going to outright skip it in order to finish the arc that they were already watching. And the story behind Yugi and the Pharaoh was relegated to a flashback, and so much of it was left out, like how the Pharaoh was originally a bad guy and Yugi was afraid of him. It's crazy because Yugi and the Pharaoh don't work together as a team until the end of Duelist Kingdom, but Duel Monsters introduces them as a single entity with a split personality. Whenever Yugi enters a duel, he becomes brave and courageous because he's now a duelist. And then when it's over, he's the nice, kind-hearted boy who just wants to hang out with his friends. What I love about Zexal is that all the pieces are there, but they're not just loosely thrown into the story. They're presented in a logical order, contributing to a much more cohesive journey. That's why, even though it's officially a Yu-Gi-Oh! Spin-off, it feels like a genuine nod to the original manga. Now, not every bit of it is true to the manga. The visuals are obviously different, but even beyond that, there are loads of factors that lean more towards reimagining the story than strictly remaking it. Yu-Gi-Oh! Zexal is definitely not a replacement for the original story, and I'm not trying to persuade anyone that it outshines the Duel Monsters anime in terms of one-to-one adaptations. But Yu-Gi-Oh! Zexal does the manga proud in key ways that the Duel Monsters anime simply missed the mark on. Take for instance Yuma's journey with Astral, which mirrors Yugi's journey with the Pharaoh. Both start off trying to help a friend, but end up in over their heads. Then a spirit is summoned from their necklaces, and they're able to turn things around. From then on, they're able to use the spirit to win over unlikely friends, establish heated rivalries, and reach new heights. But here's where things also begin to diverge from the original story. Yugi, without the help of the spirit, was very good at playing games. I don't blame you for not knowing that since the Pharaoh takes over for 99% of his duels, but in the manga arcs that Duel Monsters skipped over, Yugi was good at a ton of different games, Duel Monsters included, and people would often cheat in order to beat him because they couldn't beat him fairly. This is when the Pharaoh would take over. Since he's an ancient game master with magical dark powers, his role was to find a way to get around the cheating and still win without stooping to their level. The Pharaoh kind of took over Yugi's role as well since cheating became less of a thing in Duelist Kingdom. Maybe it became the only thing, depends on how you look at it. But the point is that both Yugi and the Pharaoh were good at playing duel monsters. Yuma, on the other hand, is very bad at duel monsters. In the first episode, he gets mocked by his own friends when he claims that he wants to be a Duel Monsters champion. And his lack of skill is what gets him into trouble until Astral appears and bails him out. One of Yuma's friends loses his deck in a wager duel. Yuma tries to win it back by wagering his own deck, and he's still not good at the game. No matter how much he cherishes their friendship, it doesn't make him any better. That is, until Astral appears from his necklace when he's about to lose. He tells Yuma what to do in order to win, and they narrowly manage to do so. And this is another thing that I love that they changed. It's not even debatable. Astral cannot possess Yuma like the Pharaoh did to Yugi. Instead of sharing a body, Astral exists outside of Yuma as a spirit that only he can see. And I'm such a big fan of this change because the biggest issue with Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters is that Yugi is the main character of the series. It's named after him. But he takes a back seat after the Death T arc, which ended on chapter 40 of the manga, before the Duel Monsters anime even begins. Then at the end of the series, Yugi duels against the Pharaoh and wins, even though he barely did anything for most of the series. How is anyone supposed to expect Yugi to be better than the Pharaoh if it's been so long since Yugi succeeded at anything without the Pharaoh? Again, Yugi does do a lot more in the early arcs of the manga, but this is not present in the 2000s anime adaptation. And even if we're talking about the manga, most of the series is the Duel Monsters portion. It's unfortunate too because Yugi was such a good character to follow. His journey as a shy nerd who uses gaming to make friends was so relatable. But then he's essentially replaced by the Pharaoh, who's good at everything. He's even taller. What I love about Yuma and Astral is that Astral can't do anything for Yuma. They never step on each other's toes because they have separate roles. Astral takes the role of a teacher. He advises Yuma, and Yuma doesn't even listen half the time. It really feels like there are two distinct leads, each with their own quirks and struggles. They don't even like each other for quite some time. Yuma doesn't want to be bossed around, so he ignores Astral, even to his own detriment, and Astral is annoyed because he's so good at dueling, but he can't duel. He has to follow around some kid who sucks at the game and is too immature to even follow his instructions. At least, that's how it starts out. Over the course of the series, the two learn to work together as Yuma develops his dueling skills and Astral becomes more compassionate. And this idea is present in the original manga. It's just almost completely gone from the Duel Monsters anime. And another thing that's completely missing is a key part of Joey's character arc. It's common knowledge that Joey's not a good student, and he doesn't have the best home life since his parents got divorced. But they never explain how Joey went from being a delinquent to becoming Yugi's best friend. Think about it. Their personalities are so different. At the start of Duel Monsters, Joey isn't even good at games, so it makes you wonder how they even connected to begin with. And I'm sure you saw this coming, it's explained at the beginning of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Manga. Yugi and Joey weren't friends, but they weren't exactly enemies either. In the first chapter, Joey views Yugi as a wimp, so he frequently teases him. At one point, he takes something away from Yugi and dares him to do something about it. Yugi isn't afraid of Joey, but he's not strong enough to stop him, so he kinda just puts up with it. Later, Yugi discovers that Joey was attacked by a real bully named Yugioh. Yes, it's the same guy from Yu-Gi-Oh! 5Ds. And to Joey's surprise, Yugi stands up to Yugioh to defend him. Yugi knows that Joey is only trying to make him stronger, so while the teasing is annoying, he believes that Joey's heart is in the right place. This prompts Joey to return the stolen item, which happened to be the last piece of Yugi's necklace. Yugi puts it together and summons the Pharaoh for the first time. Yugioh is defeated in a shadow game, ensuring that he will never bully anyone ever again. Joey is astonished by Yugi's bravery, and the two become friends from that point onward. And that's only how they met. The story doesn't stop there. Multiple times throughout the first arc of the manga, the bond between Yugi and Joey is tested. There's a part where Joey's delinquent past catches up with him. Before he enrolled at Domino High, he was part of a gang. This gang finds him hanging around Yugi, and they threaten him, so he rejoins the gang on the condition that his friends at Domino High won't be harmed by them. Eventually, Yugi finds out what Joey's been doing for him, and he, along with his other friends, decide to take down the gang. And my favorite instance of this is when the roles are reversed. Yugi beats somebody in a video game at an arcade, then his opponent beats him up in real life. Joey follows the guy into an alley and challenges him to a game involving real hand-to-hand combat, and of course he wins. I love this chapter because it depicts Joey using his fists to protect someone, whereas before, he would fight people over dumb stuff like territory as a gang member. It's truly amazing how much these two go through before Duelist Kingdom, and it's unfortunate that so many people will never know the full story. That's why I think everyone should read the manga. But don't worry, as you might have guessed, Yugioh Zexal has you covered. The guy who threatens to take Yuma's deck in the first episode is another student from Yuma's school named Shark. Now, it probably won't come as a shock to learn that Yuma and Shark become best friends later down the line, but what's interesting is that despite having a relationship similar to Yugi's and Joey's, they kinda swap roles. Yuma is the inferior duelist, and Shark is the one who has a reputation as being a top player. And even though Shark is a delinquent at the start of the series, his past is quite different from Joey's. He was never a Duel Monsters champion or anything crazy like that, but he's well known in his community since he made it to the semifinals of a big tournament. The problem is Shark got disqualified, so it's not exactly a positive reputation. He was caught examining another duelist deck before a match, and that's against the rules. Since being disqualified, Shark has been on a downward spiral. He stopped attending school, frequently hangs out with criminals, and he even quits playing Duel Monsters after losing to Yuma in the beginning. His journey kind of reminds me of Bandit Keith. But things change for the better when Yuma challenges Shark again. Even though Yuma won their first duel, he recognizes that he only won because Astral was there to help. He even received a special card from Astral. But Yuma's had time to improve since the last time he faced Shark, and he doesn't like the fact that Shark quit playing as a result of losing to him. This time, Yuma promises that he will try to beat Shark without using Astral's help or any of the cards that he received from Astral. Shark doesn't accept the challenge, but then Yuma wagers his necklace, a prized possession that came from his father, on the condition that if Yuma wins, Shark has to quit hanging around with thugs. Shark begrudgingly accepts, and Yuma loses. First of all, I didn't see that coming. When I watched this, I totally expected Yuma to win. Another thing that I didn't see coming, Yuma used the special card that he got from Astral anyway. He betrayed his promise and still lost. Really goes to show how bad Yuma is at playing Duel Monsters. But that's not what's important here. What's important is that Yuma's determination sparked something within Shark. In the next episode, Yuma finds out that Shark's group is planning to rob a museum, and he challenges them to a duel outside of the museum, and the loser has to go home. Shark decides to join Yuma in a tag duel against the other thugs. It seems that Yuma's undying spirit is starting to rub off on Shark, and now he's enjoying dueling again. You see, in the first Yuma vs Shark duel, Yuma won because of the special card Astral gave him. In the rematch, Shark asked Yuma to use the card, even though he said he wouldn't, because he wanted to challenge himself to beat it. And since Shark succeeded in doing so, it reignited his competitive spirit. And we could pinpoint the exact moment that marks the shift in Shark's attitude. When Shark wins the rematch, he takes Yuma's necklace, but then he gives it right back. Even though he won it fair and square in a duel, he doesn't feel good about taking something so precious to his opponent. It didn't bother him when he broke Yuma's necklace in the first episode, but something's changed. And this act of returning Yuma's necklace closely resembles the first moment that Joey showed respect for Yugi. I also enjoy the way Shark is depicted outside of duels. He's clearly similar to Joey, seeing as they're both friendly rivals who were introduced as people who would pick on the main character. However, unlike Joey, Shark stays true to the delinquent character archetype. Technically, they're both delinquents before they meet the protagonist. They skip school, hang out with thugs, take things from people, but deep down, Joey was always a nice guy. Shark, on the other hand, is anything but. When Yuma helps him sever ties with his bad influences, the thugs trying to rob the museum, he stops skipping school, and he helps Yuma in times of need. But he keeps his distance from pretty much everyone else, and he's kind of a jerk for no reason. It presents us with a clash of personalities that was only prevalent in the original story prior to Duelist Kingdom. And I think that's actually kind of cool. There is a second rival who bears a strong resemblance to Kaiba, but we'll talk about him later in the video. I don't want to get into the plot just yet. First, I think it's important to understand why Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters skipped so much of the manga. And the reason is actually quite simple. The Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters anime, which is known simply as Yu-Gi-Oh! Outside of Japan, was the second Yu-Gi-Oh! Anime. The first, called Yu-Gi-Oh! In Japan, aired in 1998 and it was animated by Toei Animation. And Yu-Gi-Oh! 1998, which we'll just call Season 0 for the sake of avoiding confusion, adapted the first 3 arcs of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Manga. The first arc follows a school slice of life as well as Monster of the Week format where Yugi and his friends participate in various different games. The second takes place in a theme park called Death Tea. Once again, Yugi and his friends are forced to participate in a bunch of games, but this time they're trying to rescue Yugi's grandpa from Kaiba. The third arc was about a single game between Yugi and Bakura. A lot of people still don't know about Season 0 because it never aired outside of Japan, and perhaps due to some licensing issue, Konami has never acknowledged it. Then the animation studio was changed from Toei to Gallop for Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters, which of course is the second Yu-Gi-Oh! Anime. And as we all know, the first arc of Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters is Duelist Kingdom. And the reason they skip so much is actually really simple. Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters began airing in the year 2000. That's not a lot of time after Toei's adaptation ended, so the story of Yu-Gi-Oh! 1998 was still fresh in the minds of fans in Japan. Instead of retelling the entire story that was adapted by the Toei anime, they condensed most of it into a single episode and told the rest later out of order. So it's like a sequel and a second launch at the same time. It kinda made sense to start at Duelist Kingdom 2, since Konami knew from the manga, which was nearing the end of Duelist Kingdom, that the story would shift its focus to the card game, which is much less prevalent in Season 0. And the Yu-Gi-Oh! OCG started in 1999, which is about a year before Duel Monsters began airing. It was pretty smart from a marketing perspective. And even though I agree with the logic behind skipping as much as they did, I don't think they did the best job. Far be it from me to tell an animation studio how to do their job, but it's no secret that the way they handled things caused certain parts of the story to be very confusing. A prime example being the duel between Yugi and Kaiba in Duelist Kingdom. Kaiba just looks like a sore loser when he steps on that cliff, since all we know about him prior to this duel is that he kidnapped Yugi's grandpa over a card. Then of course he tore it up so nobody could get it back. There's also the fact that Yugi wasn't even aware of the pharaoh for a while, and when he became aware, he was afraid because the pharaoh would commit acts of cruelty that, although in some cases were earned, Yugi would never willingly do on his own. This is why Yugi was crying at the end of the duel. The pharaoh tried to attack Kaiba while he was standing on the ledge, and Yugi didn't want to hurt Kaiba, but he can't control the pharaoh. If Anzu hadn't intervened, Yugi would have been helpless to stop the pharaoh from taking Kaiba's life. The anime actually did a decent job of patching up some of these issues with some of the filler, like Noah's Ark and Waking the Dragons, but I can't stress enough how bad the timing is of Noah's Ark, and telling things out of order just doesn't do it justice. Now, before we get back to Yu-Gi-Oh! Zexal, I need to give a quick disclaimer. Since I'm going to be talking about specific plot points, it's important to note that this video is based on the Japanese version of Yu-Gi-Oh! Zexal. I haven't seen the English version, so I can't be certain, but given that 4Kids has a bad track record of changing things, and at times completely removing them, it's very important that I make this distinction clear. And since I've only seen the Japanese version, I'm going to be using the Japanese names for characters, cards, locations, and pretty much everything else. I'm also going to spoil a lot of the story, so here's your spoiler warning. Everything kicks off when Astral is summoned from Yuma's necklace. The impact of Astral traveling from the astral world to the human world causes Astral to lose his memory. And while that sounds very similar to the original story, things are once again quite different. First of all, we don't know why Astral went to the human world, let alone why he went to Yuma specifically. The pharaoh doesn't have any of his memories when he meets Yugi in the original story either, but we know that the pharaoh was trapped in the puzzle for thousands of years, and Yugi became possessed by the pharaoh because he is the one who solved the Millennium Puzzle. Then we learn about the Millennium items pretty shortly after that, so it becomes clear rather quickly that Yugi was simply unlocking a special power from a special item. And the concept is mostly the same in Zexal, but in the original, the question is why was the spirit trapped in a puzzle? In Yu-Gi-Oh! Zexal, we know Astral came from another place called the Astral World, but the reason he went to find Yuma specifically is what's unknown. And I love the way they execute this concept in Yu-Gi-Oh! Zexal because Astral's memories aren't simply hidden away. They're not waiting to be uncovered by a certain action or event. When Astral's memories are scattered, they take the form of special cards called numbers. There are exactly 100 of these cards, each containing a fragment of Astral's missing memories. So in order to remember his mission, why he traveled to find Yuma, Astral needs to collect all 100 of these cards. The problem is that the numbers have manifested in the decks of random duelists all around the world. And the only way to take their numbers is by defeating them in a duel while also using a number. Number cards can only be destroyed by other numbers. But Astral can't duel in the human world. In fact, nobody can see him except for Yuma. So instead, Astral follows Yuma around and helps him win duels while he acquires pieces of his memory. And this is awesome for a bunch of reasons. Since the numbers are fragments of Astral's memory, whenever Yuma acquires a number card, we're shown the memory that the card contained. And it feels like we're inching closer and closer to solving a big mystery. Almost every battle is like a piece of a big puzzle, a fraction of a larger picture. And get this, there's another layer to these cards. When a person touches a number, their heart's darkness and desires are magnified. But in exchange, they receive a special power that is unique to that specific number. Take for instance the case of Hayami Shuta, a small-time photographer in Heartland City. When Shuta finds the number 25 card, he gains the ability to capture glimpses of future events. Since he's always the first person to photograph these events, his photography business is catapulted into the upper echelons of the media industry. However, as you might have guessed, there is a sinister twist to Shuta's newfound power. These images aren't just glimpses into the future. When Shuta takes a photo, the subject of that photo is guaranteed to suffer some type of tragedy in the near future. At one point, he takes a photo of Yuma's friend Kotori just before she boards a blimp. Later, the engine malfunctions while Kotori is still riding it. Shuta isn't capturing the future, he's manufacturing it. And he's aware of this too. In fact, he takes photos of his opponents at the start of every duel he enters to guarantee that they'll lose. It's kind of crazy how a humble endeavor towards professional advancement quickly devolved into a moral dilemma of catastrophic consequences, all because of a single card. For some reason, these powers don't work on Yuma, which may or may not have something to do with Astral's mission. We'll talk more about that later. But it's important to keep this in mind because it prevents Yuma from getting a bunch of superpowers as he collects the numbers. At first I was disappointed when I realized this, but it would be kind of insane if Yuma did. He gets so many numbers by the end of the first arc, and having the power of just one of these cards would make it near impossible for Yuma to lose. And I know that numbers not working on Yuma also makes him sound overpowered. When Shuta duels with Yuma, he takes a photo at the start of their duel that depicts Yuma losing, and Yuma simply doesn't lose because he can't be controlled by the numbers. So what's the point of these numbers if none of them work on the main character? Well, just because they don't work on him doesn't mean they don't affect him. Number 7, for example, is used to enhance the luck of the person who holds it. When a gambler by the name of Charlie McCoy discovers the card, he becomes insanely lucky. He commits crimes and leads the police on wild chases. Then he always escapes just in the nick of time. But this power works during duels as well. Since he's a gambler, Charlie's deck revolves around dice rolls. And when he duels, he gets perfect roll after perfect roll. So even though the number can't apply its power to Yuma directly, it certainly has a negative impact on him. It's not easy to win a duel against somebody who has perfect luck, especially considering how much luck plays into the Yu-Gi-Oh card game. Oh, and Yuma's not the only one who knows about the numbers. There are multiple factions, as well as individuals who aim to collect as many of them as possible. Since Astral doesn't remember why he went to the human world, it's unclear how others know about these cards, especially since they manifested the same time Astral arrived. But it's assumed that they play a role in his mission, and that's the basis of the story. Two of the biggest plot points from the original Yu-Gi-Oh!, the Millennium Items and the Pharaoh's Missing Memories, have made their way into Zexal as a singular concept, through the number cards. And they were actually very smart to make the items cards this time around instead of Egyptian trinkets. I always enjoyed the Egyptian theme. It's not very common in the realm of anime and manga, but the way numbers seamlessly weave the cards into the story makes it feel less like an afterthought. And that's kind of important because the cards literally were an afterthought of the original story. Since the cards were so popular, they adjusted things later on, but it's no secret that the cards were not initially intended to be a major focus in Yu-Gi-Oh! Kazuki Takahashi himself, the creator of Yu-Gi-Oh!, has stated in multiple interviews that the series was created with a ton of different games in mind. The only reason the Duel Monsters card game became so prominent is because readers of the manga enjoyed it so much. There's a postcard at the end of every Jump magazine where readers can submit feedback on their favorite and least favorite series. Every Yu-Gi-Oh! Chapter featuring the Duel Monsters card game was extremely popular, so Takahashi kept bringing it back. I know this is technically a betrayal of the original story. The only game in Zexal is Duel Monsters, but the original had a bunch of different games. My favorite part of Yu-Gi-Oh! Actually is the Season 0 part that was not adapted by Duel Monsters, so I think it would have been cool if they kept that spirit alive. but it wouldn't make sense to bring that into Zexal since the cards took over relatively early on and remained the focus for more than 2/3 of the story. The Yu-Gi-Oh card game is so intrinsic to the identity of the franchise that they can't just take it out now. And while we're still on the subject of cards, I want to tell you guys about the third element of the numbers plot, which most people look over: card collecting. The idea of different groups racing to acquire rare cards resonates with me on a personal level. I know I'm in the minority for this since most people buy Yu-Gi-Oh cards so they can play with them. It's the complete opposite of the Pokemon TCG. Even though it is a playable card game, more than 90% of the people who buy Pokemon booster packs are trying to get certain cards to put in a binder. But my favorite aspect of the Yu-Gi-Oh hobby has always been collecting the cards. I have different binders for different sets like the original Japanese prints from Series 1 and historic English sets like The Legend of Blue Eyes White Dragon. I keep a sealed booster pack from almost every Yu-Gi-Oh set. I've acquired sample cards that were never intended for public release. It's difficult to explain why, but it's like putting together a museum of personal artifacts. The Mona Lisa is cool and all, but I was actually there when Stardust Dragon made its way on the playgrounds. I remember when Link Monsters debuted, and I couldn't wait to get my hands on the Link Strike starter deck. Yu-Gi-Oh! Zexal is the first Yu-Gi-Oh! Anime where card collecting is a central plot point. Granted, it's not like the characters are opening booster packs and sticking their favorite cards into binders, but it's this rush to get special cards before everyone else that feels so relatable. I know collecting cards was technically a big part of Battle City, since there were a bunch of people trying to capture all 3 of the Egyptian god cards. And 5Ds put a ton of emphasis on gathering the Signer Dragons. But the god cards were acquired relatively quickly since there were only 3 of them, and everybody who wanted them knew exactly where to go. The Signer Dragons are more realistic since they're so rare in real life, but again, it's only 6 cards, and the main characters weren't trying to collect them. There are 100 number cards in Zexal, with some of them being more sought after than others. And I'd argue that Zexal gave us one of the coolest dragon monsters of all time. They also gave us a new summoning method called Xyz summoning. It's not my personal favorite, that title belongs to Link summoning, but it's a close second considering the level of depth it brought to the game, while still being relatively easy to understand. It's so simple in fact that they devoted less than a minute of screen time to explaining how it works. By stacking 2 monsters of the same level, players can summon an Xyz monster of equivalent rank. Sometimes more than 2 monsters are required, or they must share a specific type, but the fundamental concept remains the same. But what truly sets Xyz monsters apart is the utilization of their summoning material. Many of their effects necessitate a certain number of stacked cards to be maintained or discarded. It's like wielding a powerful weapon with limited ammunition. Determining how and when to use it requires some thought. And this aspect of Xyz summoning is very fitting considering Yuma's growth as a duelist is central to the plot of Yu-Gi-Oh! Zexal. As he accumulates more number cards, he must learn to use them properly. And since all of his number cards came from someone else, the dynamic of integrating numbers into his own deck is so refreshing. Yugi would often whip out new cards as well, but we had no idea how he got them. He was always summoning the perfect card at the perfect time. Yuma's use of the numbers is more akin to Joey's journey through Battle City. During this arc, he uses the anti-rule to take his opponent's best cards and add them to his deck. This way is much more realistic, and it never gets old because there are so many numbers. But that's enough about the cards. The first 25 or so episodes of Yu-Gi-Oh! Zexal are spent on Yuma's growth as a duelist before entering a big tournament. I know a lot of people are turned off by this part because it feels like nothing is really happening. Most of the episodes start with Yuma going to school and then dueling someone afterwards to obtain a number card. And it doesn't help that a lot of Yuma's opponents from this arc never duel again. At times it can also feel like a lecture on how to play the real game, since Yuma frequently makes mistakes and then Astral has to explain what went wrong and show him how to fix it. But hear me out, this part is definitely worth watching. I'm not a fan of the Monster of the Week structure, and I certainly don't enjoy it when the anime feels like a tutorial. The reason I quit watching Yu-Gi-Oh! Go Rush is because of the 13 episodes I watched, at least 10 of them were focused on a specific rule of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Rush Duel game. There's one episode devoted solely to explaining trap cards, another about tribute summoning, there's one about effect monsters, and I remember an episode that happens later where the main character is quizzed on what he learned in the episodes prior. But there's so much more going on in Yu-Gi-Oh! Zexal outside of the duels. I can't stress enough how big a difference it makes when quality time is devoted to setting up character dynamics before important events. All of the Yuma and Shark stuff that I talked about earlier in the video happens during this part of the show. Now try to imagine if they skipped right to the tournament and that's where Yuma meets Shark. I can tell you right now that Yuma does duel Shark at some point in the tournament, and without knowing the outcome, you can already imagine how much less meaningful it would be if they didn't have the pre-tournament context. And Shark's not the only important character who Yuma meets in the first arc. About halfway through, Yuma meets a number hunter named Kite, the second rival I hinted at earlier in the video. Kite is essentially Yuma's polar opposite. Both are duelists aiming to collect all 100 number cards, which naturally puts them at odds with each other, but there's more to it than that. Yuma collects number cards because Astral helps him improve his dueling skills, and Yuma aspires to be the best duelist. Kite, on the other hand, collects them to save his younger brother Heart, who is suffering from a terminal illness. Kite's employer has promised to cure Heart if Kite collects all 100 numbers, so dueling is just a means to an end for Kite. And his employer, a mad scientist named Dr. Faker, is rumored to be the true ruler of Heartland City. Since only Astral can obtain a number card by simply winning a duel, Kite has to use special technology that was given to him by Dr. Faker. Unfortunately for Kite, this technology comes with a special price. In order to duel with a number user, he has to enter Photon mode, which drains him physically, limiting his dueling time. Also, whenever Kite takes a number, he extracts his opponent's soul as a side effect. It's not something he enjoys doing. In fact, he complains about this to a higher up, who also happens to be the mayor of the city, but he's informed that the souls of number users are already corrupted, so it's better this way. But it's not all bad. Kite's robot assistant, Orbital 7, can freeze time temporarily, leaving only those with numbers unaffected. This allows Kite to isolate and duel his targets without any interference. He also has a duel anchor that forces his target to duel until it's over. This item actually appeared in Yu-Gi-Oh! 5Ds, but it wasn't used that much. Orbital 7 can also transform into various objects, like a motorcycle and a jetpack, which allows Kite to travel around the city very quickly. By now, you probably don't need me to tell you that Kite is similar to Seto Kaiba, but he actually reminds me more of Batman. I mean, just check out his introduction. During a standoff between a criminal with a number card and the police, the ceiling suddenly collapses. Time freezes, except for the criminal and Yuma who's watching nearby. A whistle echoes throughout the mall as a shadowy figure approaches. The man reveals himself as a number hunter, challenges the criminal to a duel, defeats him to acquire his number, and snatches his soul. From Yuma and Astral's perspective, this is mind-blowing. Not only is there another number hunter, but this guy is snatching the souls of his enemies, and he doesn't even need number cards to win. I know I mentioned earlier that numbers can only be defeated by each other, but Kite figured out that if a number monster runs out of Xyz units, the cards stacked underneath it, it loses its immunity to non-number monsters. Kite still uses some of the number monsters he acquires, but his signature card isn't even an Xyz monster. It's Galaxy Eye's Photon Dragon, which again is one of the best dragon designs in all of Yu-Gi-Oh! After witnessing the mall scene, Astral starts to worry. At this point, he knows his mission is to prevent the destruction of the Astral world, but he doesn't know why it's under attack or who's behind it. So if there are other number hunters, they need to act fast. The next day, Kite catches Yuma on his way home from school. Astral tells Yuma to run away, but Kite uses his duel anchor to stop him. Then Astral tells Yuma that Kite is unlike any opponent he's ever faced. Usually, Yuma ignores Astral's advice, but this time he agrees to work together. Despite their efforts, Kite dominates the duel. In fact, he's about to win the duel until he's suddenly called away due to a medical emergency involving his younger brother. But don't be mistaken, this is very much a loss for Yuma and Astral. That may not surprise you considering Yuma is generally bad at dueling, but in this duel, there were no mistakes. Astral and Yuma teamed up and they still lost. And normally I hate it when the protagonist is rescued from defeat by an interruption, but Yuma's already lost plenty of times, so it's not the same scenario that we usually see. And I was actually surprised to see him lose this time because his life was on the line. Anyway, after their crushing defeat, Yuma and Astral become depressed. Yuma is upset that his life is at risk through no fault of his own, and Astral doubts himself. He experiences fear for the first time. But Yuma quickly cheers up when a big tournament called the World Duel Carnival is announced. This is their opportunity to get revenge against Kite, and for Astral to acquire the rest of the number cards since duelists from around the world are going to be entering. But Astral isn't so optimistic. Later, Kite steals Yuma's necklace and uses it to confront Astral directly. Kite challenges him to a duel where both of them wager all of their numbers. Eventually, Yuma finds out what's happening and he joins them, but something strange happens. When Yuma joins the duel, he unlocks something called the Power of Zale. He uses this power to fuse with Astral, and they duel as one being. Basically, it's Super Saiyan Yuma. The duel ends in a draw, and Kite flees the scene. The next day, time freezes while Yuma is walking to school. He looks up and he spots Kite on a rooftop. Kite says, "We'll settle the score at the World Duel Carnival." This concludes the first arc, and what an ending that was. First of all, I love the fact that Yuma has two different rivals. On one hand, we have Shark, who aspires to be the best duelist, and on the other, we have Kite, who is attempting to collect all 100 numbers. I can't praise the writers enough for this decision. Giving Yuma a separate rival for each goal is really smart because only one of these goals actually belongs to Yuma. I touched on this before, but one of the problems with Yugi and the Pharaoh in the original Yu-Gi-Oh! Is that Yugi gets completely overshadowed by the Pharaoh. Technically, Yugi's goal was achieved when he made a bunch of friends in Season 0, since he never cared about being the best at any game. Playing games was just a means of making friends. Then he needed to rescue his grandpa and duel his kingdom, but after that, Yugi's goal became simply to help the Pharaoh achieve his own goal. That's fine and all because it led to Battle City, which was awesome. And it's mostly the same concept as what we're seeing here in Zexal. But the dynamic between Yuma and Astral is so much more intriguing. Yuma is just a kid who wants to be good at dueling. Astral is on a mission to save his home planet, so it makes perfect sense that these two wouldn't be very cooperative. And the only reason they work together is because Astral helps Yuma improve at dueling. But at the end of the arc, everything changes because they become legitimate friends. Just think of how selfless it was for Yuma to join Astral in his duel against Kite. Not only was Yuma safe from losing his soul since Kite went directly to the source of the numbers, Yuma had already witnessed firsthand how powerful Kite was. Losing wasn't just a possibility, it was highly likely. And Yuma actually would have benefited from allowing Astral to lose. By this point, Yuma had come a long way as a duelist, and if Astral lost, the target on his back would have been erased. Losing his numbers means no more number hunters, not to mention the fact that everyone thinks Yuma is insane for talking to a ghost. But he still went out of his way to help Astral. And this is what the power of Zale represents. The reason they fuse, or overlay since it's more like an Xyz summon, is because their goals have become one now that they're friends. It's no longer an exchange of services. Yuma doesn't want Astral to lose, because he genuinely cares for him. I know it's corny and introducing superpowers at the last minute feels kinda random, but the symbolism is actually really good here. And it's cool that this power doesn't come into play until the end of the first arc. The moment Yuma truly extends himself to aid Astral, something only a true friend would do, he unlocks the power of Zale. It's like at the end of Death Tea when Yugi summoned Exodia, or even the Crimson Dragon in 5Ds. The power of Zale is just another emblem of friendship. Only the power of Zale allows the users to fight as one, not metaphorically, but literally. And as far as rivalries go, Kite and Shark are so much better than Kaiba. Don't get me wrong, I like Kaiba, he's a cool character, but is it really a rivalry when one of the guys never wins except when he cheats? Shark beats Yuma while Yuma is the one cheating, and Kite is so good that Yuma and Astral couldn't beat him while using a literal plot armor superpower. And just a side note here, the anime is actually named after the power of Zale. I don't know why there's a silent X in there, because the name is officially pronounced Yugioh Zale in Japan. Think of it like Hunter x Hunter or Spy Family, only the X in those names represents a space between two different words, whereas Zexal or Zale is a single word. Anyway, I'm going to continue to refer to the show as Yugioh Zexal, because leaving out the X is going to get me mixed up with the power itself within the show. I hope that made sense. I'll be honest, the other main characters in this arc aren't all that interesting. Kotori is like Anzu but more clingy, she appears in every episode but never duels once. Tetsuo is Yuma's best friend at the start of the anime, but he falls to the wayside as Shark becomes more prominent. Kathy is just a rival to Kotori since they both have a crush on Yuma, and Tokunosuke is somewhat interesting. He's like if Weevil Underwood somehow befriended Yugi after tossing Exodia into the ocean. I actually like him a lot because he's not necessarily evil, but he still causes trouble for the others, which is pretty funny. But none of these guys are relevant to the plot. Don't get me wrong, I'm not complaining. There are plenty of well-written characters in Zexal who contribute to the overall story. It's just a little odd because essentially what they did was take the two most useless characters from the original Yu-Gi-Oh! And duplicate them. Now the main character has 4 cheerleaders instead of 2. Yuma's group is slightly more interesting than Yugi's, but mainly because of Tokunosuke. While everyone is preparing for the big tournament, Yuma discovers that Shark does not intend to enter. He tells Yuma that he no longer duels for glory. Yuma is disappointed because he wants the rematch in the tournament, but he understands Shark's decision. Later, Shark is approached by a duelist with deep scars on his face, a man named Four. the same guy who won the tournament that Shark was disqualified from. He asks if Shark will be entering the WDC, and he says no. 4 reminds him that they were supposed to duel each other before he was disqualified. Then he suggests that the circumstances leading to his disqualification, Shark's sister being hospitalized the night before, and his deck being visible right before their duel, were no accident. Shark becomes enraged, but rather than resort to violence, he agrees to settle things in a duel during the WDC. Now, I know it's kind of random for Shark to have a sister, let alone one who's in the hospital, but Joey's sister was introduced in almost the exact same way in the original story. When Yugi received the Duelist Kingdom invitation after losing his grandpa to Pegasus, Joey received a VHS tape from his sister named Shizuka. And prior to the scene, Shizuka was not present in the original story. I don't think it was even mentioned that Joey had a sister. She did appear in the Toei anime, but that adaptation took a ton of creative liberties, and they were only able to do so because, of course, the manga was ahead and had already introduced her. But it works a bit differently in Yugioh Zexal because Shark has been a mysterious character from the beginning. He doesn't spend a lot of time with Yuma or any of the other main characters, so he's a lot more mysterious than Joey was. This isn't to say that Shizuka was introduced poorly, I think it was a good twist. The author wanted Joey to have a strong motivation to compete against Yugi in a big tournament where Yugi also had a strong motivation. It was a good twist for Joey to have a sister who was ill, even though it wasn't necessarily something we could predict. Another important distinction between Joey and Shark is that Joey competed in Duelist Kingdom to prevent his sister from being harmed. He needed money to save her eyesight. But Shark competes in the WDC to avenge his sister. The damage has already been done, and he's competing to make up for his own failure to protect her. She's been hospitalized since before we even knew about her, so introducing her at this time kind of explains why Shark is so mean all the time. He's not just an outcast due to being disqualified from a tournament, there's that, and his sister was in a tragic accident not that long ago. Now, I'll be honest, I don't really like the twist in Zexal. I think it's a good idea. I understand that they wanted to keep the core concept from the original story present in Zexal. But a twist like this doesn't really work because they tell us it wasn't an accident and who was behind it right after they tell us about the event itself. I really wish they put more time in between these 2 points because it's all laid out for us in a single conversation. When we discover that 4 was behind all of this, there's nothing to be shocked about because the events themselves were just discovered. We knew Shark was disqualified and now we know he didn't actually cheat, but the bigger revelation here is that Shark has a sister. The twist undercuts itself with poor timing. Anyway, Shark finds 4 pretty early in the tournament. He challenges him to a duel, but just as 4 accepts, a man named 3, yes, I know these names are silly, uses a duel anchor on Shark. Unbeknownst to Shark, 4 is part of a group of number hunters, and since Shark doesn't have any numbers, 4 isn't allowed to duel him. 3 reminds 4 of his mission, then 4 tells Shark to meet him in the finals before leaving the scene. Shark defeats 3 in a duel, then 3 gives him a special number card as a reward. Yuma, who witnessed the whole thing, starts to worry. He doesn't like that Shark is dueling for revenge, so he tries to reason with him. Shark tells Yuma to stay out of it before riding off on his motorcycle, but Astro claims that their paths will definitely cross again now that Shark possesses a number card. Later in the tournament, Shark gets matched up with 4. If you recall, Shark has been gifted a number card and numbers are known to expand the darkness and desires of the person who holds it. Up till now, Shark had been doing quite well to fend off the number's influence, but when he's on the brink of defeat in a duel against his arch-rival, he willingly succumbs to its power. As a result, the number evolves into a new monster and he is able to win the duel. In the aftermath, 4 apologizes to Shark. He claims that what happened to his sister truly was an accident. He only suggested that it was on purpose because he needed Shark to enter the WDC. Shark doesn't buy it, but then 4 explains what really happened to his sister. He claims that his mission back then was simply to duel with her. 4's boss, a man named Tron, had given him a special card to use. What 4 didn't know is that this special card was a trigger that would set the entire building on fire. He tells Shark that he never intended to hurt anyone, and the only reason his sister made it to the hospital is because he helped her escape the building, and the scars on his face are a result of that. Shark says nothing as they part ways. He now has a new target for his vengeance. Next, what happens is a duel between Yuma and Shark. Finally, the original rivals are going to have a duel on the biggest stage. But something's not quite right. When Shark surrendered to the power of his number card, the one he received from 3, he also surrendered to Tron. It turns out that Tron's plan from the very beginning was to exploit Shark's anger. 3's mission was to give Shark the number 32 card, and 4's mission was to bring Shark to his boiling point. Now that everything is in place, Tron is using Shark to accomplish his true goal, which is to assassinate Dr. Faker. We'll talk more about this in a bit, but for now, we need to take a step back because Shark isn't the only one who had a shift in motivation before entering the WDC. Yuma's reason changed unexpectedly as well. He still wants to collect the rest of the numbers now that he's committed to helping Astral get his memories, but he claims that winning the tournament itself is not his focus. There's a scene that takes place the night before the WDC begins where Yuma tells Kotori that he's not competing, he's just dueling. I was pretty mad when I first saw this because one of the best things about Zexal, as I've already explained, is that Yuma has a different goal from Astral. Yugi and the Pharaoh are technically both main characters in the original story, but the problem is that it's hard to see them as two different characters because one overtakes the other. But now that Yuma's committed to helping Astral get his memories, and he has the opportunity to achieve his own goal at the same time by winning the WDC, he claims that he doesn't even want to win. Even Kotori is confused by this. After hearing all of this nonsense from Yuma about not wanting to win, she brings up something interesting. Yuma's father is a famous explorer who went missing some time ago. This was actually mentioned in the first arc, so it's not a sudden revelation like Shark's sister. I just didn't talk about it until now because this is the first time it's relevant to the story. Before he went missing, Yuma promised to his father that he would become a world champion duelist. Kotori reminds him of this promise, and Yuma maintains that he still doesn't care about winning, but he says that he will try his best. I'm not entirely sure what to make of this scene. It feels like the writers were trying to give Yuma a classic Yu-Gi-Oh moment where the protagonist says, "It's not about whether you win or lose, it's how you play the game." But it fails miserably. Yuma's personal goal this entire time was to be the best duelist. Granted, he is now dedicated to Astral's mission, which is to recover his memories, but why not view this as an opportunity to achieve both at the same time? Perhaps the intention is to make Yuma seem jaded. Now that he's survived an existential threat and is about to face another in the WDC, competition is no longer fun. He's not dueling for glory, he's dueling for survival. It's actually a cool idea. The only problem is that Yuma has a ton of fun during the WDC, so it's not exactly the best execution. Kite, on the other hand, is totally jaded. He's basically the best duelist around, but it doesn't matter. I bet the thought has never even crossed his mind because, while it's true that Kite has dedicated himself to dueling, it's only because he needs to collect the numbers in order to rescue his brother. But while Yuma and Shark have both seen a shift in motivation, albeit slight for Yuma, Kite has not changed one bit. But during this arc, we do finally get some backstory on Kite. So, Dr. Faker isn't just Kite's employer. He's his father. Some time ago, when Dr. Faker discovered the numbers, he forced Kite to undergo stringent training to become a number hunter. This was very rough on him, and Kite hasn't been the same since. And in the same time, Heart developed special powers that Dr. Faker has been using to launch attacks on the astral world. We already knew Dr. Faker promised to cure Heart when he gets all the numbers, and it's been shown that Dr. Faker is an enemy of Astral, but we still don't know why he wants to destroy the astral world, and we didn't know to what extent both Heart and Kite had been suffering. But Dr. Faker's cruelty extends beyond his own family. Remember the whole thing about Tron wanting to assassinate Dr. Faker? Well, it turns out that Tron is a scientist who used to work with Dr. Faker. Together, they searched for the location of a special door that would lead to the parallel worlds. Tron suggested to Faker that they enlist the help of Yuma's father, Kazuma, since he was a famous explorer. Eventually, they found the door together, but Dr. Faker had kept his true intentions a secret. When they reached the door, Faker read some hieroglyphs. When two souls are offered up, the door will open. A portal opened beneath them, and as the two were sucked in, Tron swore revenge against Dr. Faker. He eventually made his way back to Earth, but Kazuma is still missing. Tron's plan is thwarted when Yuma defeats Shark in the finals, then Tron defeats Kite to move on to the grand finals where he will face Yuma. But this duel isn't like the others. You see, Dr. Faker created this tournament to make it easier for Kite to collect the numbers. Tron eliminated Kite, so the mission should have failed. But Faker had a backup plan. The final duel between Yuma and Tron takes place in a sphere field, and a sphere field is designed to simulate the parallel worlds, so there's no gravity, but its secret function is to harness the power of the numbers. When Yuma defeats Tron, all of their numbers are taken directly to Dr. Faker, where he plans to use them to destroy the astral world. Both Shark and Kite decide to team up with Yuma to face Dr. Faker in a final battle for all the numbers. Astral is trapped in the sphere field, but he's able to give Yuma two of the numbers, 39 and 32. Yuma hands one to Shark, and now Faker has to defeat them in a duel to get the other numbers back. When Faker is about to lose, he tells them that if he doesn't destroy the astral world, Heart will die. Kite is confused because the only reason he teamed up with Yuma and Shark was to rescue Heart. Faker explains that when he opened the door to the parallel worlds, by sacrificing Tron and Kazuma, he met someone claiming to be from the Baryon world. The Baryon offered to cure Heart in exchange for the destruction of the astral world. I know this happens a ton in Yu-Gi-Oh anime where the bad guy turns out to be good in the end, but this makes for a good twist when you consider the story of Kaiba's family in the original manga. Kaiba and Mokuba were adopted by a rich CEO, but Kaiba was pushed very hard to become a master of all games. This was required in order to lead Kaiba Corporation since it was a games company. When Kaiba got older, he forced his father out of the company and became the new CEO. His father was gutted by this and took his own life. What's cool about Zexal is that Kite's family is broken as well, but it's broken by unfortunate circumstance. The younger brother becomes ill, and his father commits heinous acts out of desperation to find a cure. Then when Kite finally stands up to his father, it feels like a betrayal. Initially, we want to side with Kite because of what he went through and all of the other things his father did, but Faker's side of the story flips the entire situation on its head. One could easily argue that Dr. Faker endured more suffering than Kite and Heart. He became a monster in order to save his son, sacrificed his best friend, and alienated his other son. And despite all of this, Kite doesn't even hate his father. The reason he is fighting him is because Kite wants to restore their family. After hearing his father's side of the story, Kite tells his father that he doesn't need to make any more sacrifices if he just believes in his own family. Dr. Faker starts to cry, but then suddenly he starts screaming. A different voice can be heard as Dr. Faker becomes possessed by a Baryon. He claims that he will destroy the astral world, and this duel is far from over. Yuma, Kite, and Shark win the duel, and the Baryon retreats. Yuma recovers the numbers, and the astral world lives another day. But something's missing. Yuma and Kite have the realization that they never got to settle the score. They're not enemies anymore now that Kite no longer needs number cards, but they still have their pride as duelists. So even though Yuma is officially the World Duel Carnival champion, he challenges Kite to determine who is really the best among them. And the arc ends with Yuma losing again. I don't know how Zexal manages to do it, but I thought for sure Yuma was going to win that duel. And even though he lost, the arc ended on such a high note. Kite was able to restore his family. Yuma won the World Duel Carnival, fulfilling his promise to his father. Shark has resolved his quest for vengeance, and the astral world wasn't destroyed. The fact that Kite is still better than Yuma is great too because it shows that Yuma still has room to grow as a duelist, and beating Kite is another goal to strive towards. Then there's the whole thing about the parallel worlds. What does that mean? Who are the Baryons? And why are they targeting the astral world? Now we know that Yuma's father is still alive, but we still don't know where he is. The WDC did so much to resolve a ton of the issues facing the characters in Arc 1, and now we have new questions that need to be answered. As we enter the second half of Yu-Gi-Oh! Zexal, it was at this point that I realized either Kazuki Takahashi was more involved with Yu-Gi-Oh! Zexal than he let on, or the writer of Zexal was a huge fan of his. I suspect the answer is both, because so many of the underdeveloped and outright unfinished plotlines of the original story are present in Zexal and completed. I'll explain further in a bit. So, Yuma and his friends are back in school when suddenly the Baryons begin invading Earth. Dr. Faker's plan may have failed, but they still need the numbers, so they're going after Yuma directly. At this point, Yuma is still missing some of the numbers, but he has most of them. Yuma does well to fend off the first two Baryons, Gilag and Aulitz, but when a third arrives named Misael, he is nearly defeated. The only reason he fails is because Kite intervenes. This is one of my favorite things in Zexal. Misael's ace monster is called Galaxy Eye's Tachyon Dragon. When Kite rescues Yuma, he claims that he was drawn to this duel by his own Galaxy Eyes dragon. The two begin to duel, but it's cut short. Misael has to leave, but first, he declares that they will meet again, as there can only be one Galaxy Eyes tamer. I love this for a few reasons. Arguably the biggest difference between Kaiba and Kite is the fact that Kaiba is extremely competitive. Kite's really good at dueling, but he has displayed no desire to be the best at anything. Now that he's discovered a second galaxy-eyes dragon, he wants to obtain it to prove he's the only one who can wield the galaxy-eyes archetype. This was actually a thing in the original story as well, which harkens back to what I mentioned before, but it was very short-lived. Kaiba is known for his obsession with Blue Eyes, but he obtains every copy of the card very early in the story. Then there's the fact that Kite has a rival in this journey. Misael wants to take Galaxy Eyes Photon from Kite just as badly as Kite wants to take Galaxy Eyes Tachyon from Misael. The closest thing to a rivalry like this in the original story was Kaiba versus Yugi's grandpa, and that didn't last very long. They even add lore to this rivalry between the two Galaxy Eyes dragons. It's not just a rivalry for the sake of the cards, or the characters wanting the cards. It actually affects the story. And I don't think it's a coincidence that one of the Galaxy Eyes dragons is bright blue, while the other is dark red. Perhaps I'm alone in this, but I always found it odd that Red Eyes Black Dragon had a similar name to Blue Eyes White Dragon when there was no connection in the story. The Galaxy Eyes monsters aren't just named the same, they're drawn together. The cards themselves desire to be owned by a single duelist. And the fact that the duelists involved aren't the main hero or the main villain really goes to show how much depth Zexal has. I know that Kaiba's relationship with Blue Eyes went beyond the card, and it's explained in the final arc why he's so desperate to use it in every duel, but it didn't really add to the story since Blue Eyes was the best card in the game when Kaiba obtained it. We already knew why Kaiba wanted it. It was the best card in the game and he wanted to be the best duelist. But this arc isn't just about Kite. The Galaxy Eyes rivalry is one of the minor plot points in the Baryon arc. The primary focus of the arc is the 7 sealed numbers. Yuma receives a message from his father telling him about these 7 special numbers that are extra powerful compared to the rest. He claims that the Baryons are after them, and Yuma must collect them before they fall into the wrong hands. This is obviously a reference to the Millennium Items, of which there were only 7, but again, Zexal takes it a step further. While Yuma is hunting these special numbers, he uncovers the secret of the Baryons. Each of them were once human. But not only were they human, most of them were heroes. And the leader of the Baryons is Shark. I can't overstate how awesome this twist is. So in the original story, the Millennium Items were held by different members of the Pharaoh's court, and each item was used in service of the Pharaoh. But the special numbers in Zexal are wielded by Yuma's and Astral's arch enemies. Shark becoming a villain isn't that much of a shock, except that's not really what happens. It turns out that the Astral World is the aggressor in this conflict between the Astrals and the Baryons, and Astral was created in order to eliminate the Baryons. And the worst part is that the Baryons used to be Astrals. But one day, the leader of the Astral World became infatuated with a certain painter from Austria, then a bunch of the Astralites with certain traits and features were kicked out of the Astral World in their quest for perfection. That's what led to the creation of the Baryon world. Essentially, what this means is that Yuma was fighting for the bad guys the whole time. Of course, not everyone in the Astral World is evil, but Astral's goal this entire time, even though he had forgotten it himself, was to use the power of the numbers to destroy the Baryons. Kind of a crazy plot for Yu-Gi-Oh! And not even original for the franchise since 5Ds had a similar premise, but Zexal did such a good job of executing this. For most of the series, they convince us that one side is morally superior to the other, only to throw it all away at the end by showing us who the Baryons truly are. I couldn't believe it when Shark turned out to be a Baryon, and things got really interesting when the Baryons turned out to be good. Now, this last point is going to seem insignificant compared to the other points discussed in this video, but it stood out the most to me in terms of relation to the original story. So, Yuma's father, Kazuma, is mentioned a bunch of times throughout Yu-Gi-Oh! Zexal, but it never feels like he's an important character. He's present in the story through memories of other characters interacting with him, but he went missing before the show began, so it's hard to say that Kazuma plays a major role in the overall story. But at the very end, when Yuma is about to face his final foe, it's revealed that Astral was sent to the human world by Yuma's father. Sometime after he was sent to the parallel worlds, Kazuma ended up in the Astral World. While there, he learned about the conflict between the Astrals and the Baryons, and that a secret weapon was going to be sent to destroy the Baryons. Kazuma didn't want that to happen, so he sabotaged the mission by sending Astral to the King's Key, which is another name for Yuma's necklace. He trusted that his son would find a way to resolve the issue and teach Astral compassion. It sounds kind of ridiculous when I spell it out like that, but the point is that Yuma's father ended up being one of the most pivotal characters in the entire story. And the reason this blew my mind is because Kazuki Takahashi suggested in an old interview that Yugi's father would play a role in the final arc of the manga. That, of course, never happened because Takahashi decided to end the manga early. There wasn't as much focus on the card game in the final arc, so the series became less popular. Then this decline in popularity caused Takahashi to end it early. And this perfectly illustrates my favorite thing about Yu-Gi-Oh! Zexal. It's such a good remake of the original story. Even ideas that never made it into the original, but were supposed to, are present in Zexal, and the execution is amazing. Yuma's father was an explorer, and we knew he was somewhere in the parallel worlds, so this revelation about Yuma's father being the driving force behind the story is totally believable. The signs were there all along. And because Zexal is a reimagining rather than a replacement, it will never replace the original story. If you've seen Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters or read the manga, Zexal is still worth a watch. If you've never seen Yu-Gi-Oh!, Zexal is a great place to start. But those are just my thoughts. Thanks again to Displayed for sponsoring this video. I just launched a brand new podcast called Anime Authority, so check that out for extra content from me. Thanks for watching.